and welcome to Apollo Sky's Podfics. I'm Apollo, and this is Changling Families by LittleLadyBaker, Chapters 3 and 4. Chapter 3, Young Atlas. Walt groaned as he collapsed onto his bed, shifting into his human form as he moved. It had been a month since Jim was born, 1 month since he had gone to Troll Market and become a spy for the trollhunter in an attempt to protect his friends. And it was beginning to catch up with him. Even 700-year-old changelings need to sleep. None of that even accounted for his human life. Walt was just about to drift off to sleep when his phone began to ring. Seeing that it was Barbara, he swallowed his exhaustion and answered. "Hello," he said. "Walt," Barbara was crying. "Oh God, gosh, you were sleeping. I shouldn't have." "Barbara," Walt interrupted, suddenly wide awake. "What's wrong? Are you all right? Is Jim all right?" He's gone," Barbara whimpered. "He left, Walt." "Who, Barbara?" Walt insisted, already heading for the door, dreading the answer. "James," Barbara sobbed. He just walked out. James left us, Walt. He left us." Walt's blood began to boil. "I'm on my way, Barbara. Just hang in there." Walt drove as fast as he could to Barbara's house, heart pounding the whole way. As soon as he pulled into the driveway, Barbara ran out. Walt ran to meet her, enveloping his sobbing friend in his arms. "It's going to be all right, Barbara," he comforted. He's not coming back." Barbara whimpered into his chest. "He said he's not coming back. All those extra hours he was taking, he was cheating on me." Walt's blood boiled again. Though he couldn't say he was surprised, he had had his suspicions about James for a while, but had never had the heart to say anything to Barbara. "I'm so sorry, Barbara," he said sincerely, gently rocking her from side to side. "It's going to be okay. You'll see." I don't know what I'm going to do, Walt," Barbara stammered. "I'll have to find someone to watch." "Barbara," Walt stopped her. "What you need to do right now is get some rest. It's late, and I have no doubt that you've not slept. I will watch Jim. You go upstairs and get some sleep." "But," Barbara began. "No," Walt stopped her again. "No buts. You need to get some rest. I know you're upset, you're sad, and mad, and so many emotions all at once, my dear, but I won't let you burn yourself out. Now, go get some rest. I'll wake you if Jim or I need you." Barbara nuzzled his chest for a moment longer before leaning back. "You're sure you don't mind watching Jim?" "Positive," Walt assured. "Go. Sleep." Barbara nodded sadly and headed up the stairs. Walt turned to the living room and saw Jim asleep in the playpen. He reached down and took the sleeping infant in his arms, holding him close. "Oh, young Atlas," he murmured. "What are we going to do for her?" Before another month had passed, Walt moved into the Lake household. Draal, the trollhunter's son, also moved in, after gaining Barbara's approval, to keep an eye on Walt and also to protect the family from Bular. The two had only been living there for a month when it happened. Walt was at the dining room table grading papers from his student teaching when he heard Barbara scream, "Walt, come quick!" The changeling leapt to his feet and into the living room where Barbara held what could only be Jim, except it hardly looked like the 3-month-old. He had blue, stony skin and thick black fur on his neck, head, and shoulders. A flash of movement caught Walt's eye and drew his attention to the short, thick tail that hung down to the baby's heels. Jim had performed his first transformation. What shocked Walt the most, however, was that, aside from their color, Jim looked nothing like James. Jim looked almost like a Kubera, whereas James had been the same breed as Nomura. Barbara grinned. Look at him." Walt felt his heart melt when he saw the look on her face. Jim gurgled quietly, clearly confused by his mother's enthusiasm. Walt dropped to his knees, shifting into his troll form, and sat on his feet in front of Barbara and Jim. He cupped the baby's head and gently pressed their foreheads together. Jim smiled, and with tiny stony hands grabbed Walt's nose. Walt chuckled. "I know I say this all the time, but he truly is beautiful, Barbara." "I know." Barbara ran her fingers through his hair and feathers. "I particularly love the hair on his shoulders. It reminds me of your feathers." Walt froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked up at Barbara, thumb still stroking Jim's hair. Without thinking, he rose up on his knees and pressed his forehead firmly against Barbara's. There was something different between this and what he had just done to Jim. With a jolt, Walt leaned back, hoping that Barbara didn't know what it meant. "Wish you had done that a long time ago." Damn it, she knew. Before Walt could move again, Barbara pressed her lips against his. Walt found himself melting into the embrace, one arm around Barbara's waist, the other bracing Jim between them. "That's disgusting." They broke apart to see Draal in the walkway, just out of the basement. "It's how humans show affection, Draal." It's still disgusting, Draal insisted. Killing seems much easier. Walt chuckled at the troll's antics. At times it can seem that way. However, I doubt Barbara would appreciate me bringing home a dead deer or dead bird like a cat. Barbara laughed at that. Maybe it was hunting season, she joked. Walt smiled and kissed her again, first in the trollish fashion, then in the human. Then he pressed his forehead against Jim's once more. Draal groaned and went outside on his way to Troll Market. Walt sighed. It's like having a 10-year-old around. In what way is Draal like a 10-year-old? Barbara chuckled. He never knocks, he has no filter, he thinks all non-violent forms of affection are disgusting. Walt recited. I could keep going. Barbara laughed again. It was music to Walt's ears, as she hadn't laughed like this since James left. Seeing that Jim had transformed back into a human baby, Walt shifted into his human form. I'm going to make dinner, he said. Then I have a meeting tonight. Barbara nodded and followed him into the kitchen. Walt had explained to her about the Janus order and being a spy for Draal's father before the two had moved in. Did it scare her? Yes. Did she understand why he had to do it? Yes. Did that mean she had to like it? No. After dinner, Barbara put Jim to bed in the nursery and met Walt by the front door. I don't expect this meeting to last very long, but if I'm not home before you go to bed, Walt kissed her cheek. Good night, Barbara. Sleep well. I'll see you in the morning. I love you. Barbara smiled. He said that first part every night, and she never got tired of hearing it. Good night, Walt. I'll see you when you get home. She pressed her forehead against his and clung to his tweed jacket for a moment. And I love you, too. Walt realized just how hard that may have been for her, to be able to say I love you to anyone other than Jim after her husband left. I'll be home soon, he promised, then kissed her cheek one last time before heading to the Janus order meeting. Barbara lay in bed, alone. She had always hated sleeping alone, even as a little girl. Even as a teen and all the way into college, she had her cat to sleep with. After that, she had met James. Now, well, on nights that she couldn't sleep alone, she went and brought Jim to bed with her. She had heard Walt get home some time ago and check on the baby like he always did after the Janus order meeting. Her friend had only disturbed her at night once, and it had been because he had gone to check on Jim and found him missing. He had immediately relaxed upon finding the baby in bed with his mother. Without checking the clock, Barbara rolled out of bed and headed to her son's room. The cradle was empty. She nearly screamed as she bolted downstairs to find Walt. Her best friend wasn't in the living room, the dining room, his room, or in the basement. It was only out of the corner of her eye that she found him. Lying outside, on a blanket, with Jim on his chest, both man and baby were in their troll forms. Barbara crept outside and stood silently, listening to what Walt was telling the baby. And that, young Atlas, the older changeling whispered, is your namesake, Atlas, doomed to carry the whole world on his shoulders, much like how you are your mother and mine's whole world. Barbara let out an audible gasp. Walt looked over to her. Barbara, he said, what are you doing up? I couldn't sleep, she stammered. I went to get Jim for a cuddle and found his cradle empty. I was terrified, Walt. I thought someone took my baby. Walt sat up, eyes wide. I'm so sorry, Barbara. Had I known, I never would have brought him out. It's just, the night's so clear, and when I went to check on him, he was awake. I needed to calm down after the meeting, so I thought I would show him the stars. I didn't mean to frighten you. Barbara moved and sat next to Walt. It's all right. I was just so scared that something happened to you two. I don't know what I would do if something happened to either of you. Walt lay back down, letting Barbara lie on his extended wing, and pulled another blanket over all three of them. Barbara rested her hand on Jim's back. How long have you called him young Atlas? She asked. Since the day he was born, Walt admitted. I know James never liked it, so I only ever call Jim Atlas when it's just him and I. If you want, I'll stop. Barbara shook her head. No, you can call him young Atlas. I think it's cute. But, Walt, how long has Jim been your whole world? Walt stared up at the stars as he replied, Since the day he was born. The moment you placed him in my arms, I knew I would do anything to protect him and you. That was the day I left the Janus order. Barbara looked up at him, nearly in tears. Jim wasn't even Walt's son, yet he was willing to give up everything he knew to risk his life to protect the baby. She lay her head on Walt's shoulder and pulled the blanket more snugly over her and Jim. You should go back to bed, love, Walt whispered. Take Jim with you. No, she mumbled sleepily. Don't want to be alone. Walt shifted into his human form and pulled her closer. All right, Barbara. All right. Lucas chuckled as he bounced his nephew. Jim seemed perfectly content to sit with his uncle while his parents danced for the first time as husband and wife. It was 1 month after Jim's first transformation, and Walt had finally gotten the courage to ask Barbara to be his bride. Once the dance was finished, the military man approached his sister and brother-in-law. Walt chuckled. "I know what you're going to say, Lucas, so don't bother." The wedding had been much smaller than Barbara's wedding to James. Only Lucas and Nomura had accompanied them as witnesses, and the reception was little more than a small family dinner at the house. "I'm going to say it anyway, Wally," Lucas taunted. "I told you so." "You did," Walt agreed, kissing Barbara. "You did." "And he'll never let you forget it," Barbara assured her new husband. "I'll watch Jim tonight so you two can have a little honeymoon," Nomura offered, grinning at the baby. "We'll Skype Otto and tell him what a party he missed." Barbara grinned at the offer. She was happy with her new brother and sister-in-law, even if they were, technically, still evil. The moon shone brightly down into the back garden of the Strickler house, illuminating the newlyweds sitting there. Barbara rested her head on her husband's shoulder, and he had his arm around her waist. Having taken Nomura up on her offer to watch Jim, they were surprised to find that the house seemed to be empty without the infant around. "Barbara," Walt said into the silence, "there was something I wanted to ask you." "What is it, Walt?" Barbara sat up. "You know you can tell me anything." She had never promised not to get mad, but she would always listen before responding. Walt reached into his pocket with his free hand and handed her the small, flat, square box. "What's this?" Barbara chuckled. "Open it," Walt urged, a blush creeping up his neck. Barbara opened the box to find a small gold medallion. It was a little smaller than her palm and had trollish runes along the outer edge. It looked almost like a miniature of the brooch that held Walt's cape. "It's for young Atlas," Walt explained, "though it may be a while before he's old enough to wear it." "It's beautiful, Walt!" Barbara gasped. "Did you make it yourself, like our rings? What do the runes say?" Walt nodded. "I did make it, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I thought I should ask before getting any of the paperwork." "Paperwork?" Barbara said. "Paperwork for what?" Walt avoided her eyes, looking at the medallion. "In addition to the same protective charms on your ring, the runes also say, Jim Atlas Strickler." Once more, Barbara found herself moved by Walt's actions more than his words. Was he offering what she thought he was offering? "You can say no, Barbara," Walt assured her. "He's your son, but if you'll let me, I'd like to adopt Jim." Barbara's eyes filled with tears. You know you don't have to. Jim's going to call you Dada either way." Walt nearly started crying at the thought of being anyone's Dada, let alone Jim's. "I know," he affirmed, his voice cracking. "I want to." Barbara tackled her husband to the ground with a kiss, careful not to lose her. No, their son's medallion. "Yes, yes, yes, yes," she cried. "By all means, yes." Walt finally let his tears spill out as he held his wife, the mother of his child. Chapter 4. Domzalski. Walt scooped up Jim, kissing the toddler on the cheek. Barbara had already left for her classes, and Draal had already gone off to Troll Market. Walt just had to drop Jim off across the street at Miss Domzalski's before he, too, could head to the Hero Forge. "Are you ready to meet Nana's grandson, young Atlas?" he asked his son. "Yeah!" the 2-year-old cheered. "Yeah, Dada!" Dada. Walt never tired of hearing Jim say that simple word. Walt grinned and opened the door. "Well then, let's go." Jim wrapped his arms around his father's neck, and the two set out across the street. Only a moment after Walt knocked did the old woman, with a rather chubby toddler on her own hip, answer the door. "Ah, there you are, Walt," she said in her shrill voice. "Toby Pie has been so excited to meet Jimmy. Can you say hi to Walt and Jimmy, Toby Pie?" "Hi," the toddler gurgled with a large gap-toothed grin. "Hi," Jim replied with a matching grin. Walt set Jim on the floor and knelt in front of him. "All right, young Atlas," he said. "Dada will be back to get you in a few hours. You have fun with Toby and behave for Nana, understood?" "Yes, Dada." Jim hugged his father as if he were leaving forever. Walt chuckled and kissed Jim's forehead one last time, freezing when his lips touched smooth, cold stone rather than soft, warm flesh. Walt looked down at the whelp in his arms. "I'm sorry, Dada," Jim whispered. "I tried not to." Walt looked up at Nana and Toby fearfully. He and Barbara had worked very hard to keep this a secret. "Nana! Nana!" Toby squealed. "He's just like me!" To Walt's surprise, the red-haired boy changed much like his own just had. He had 4 arms, sky-blue skin, seafoam green hair, and black and blue eyes. Walt's jaw dropped, and Nana's eyes went wide. "I'll keep your secret if you keep mine," the old woman offered. Walt nodded. "Agreed. Shall we discuss this more with Barbara, over tea perhaps, when we come to pick Jim up?" Agreed, Nana nodded. Nana set her grandson on the floor with Jim and bid Walt goodbye. Barbara stared at the two blue children in front of her. Toby and Jim, who had become fast friends, lay on the floor by the sofa, drawing. So, she began, Toby is an alien, yes, Nana admitted. And Jimmy is a troll? Sort of, Walt clarified. Technically, he is a polymorph, as he does not have a human familiar. I've only met one other, and he does not have the same origin as young Atlas. Similar, but not the same. Jim's father was a changeling, like I am. But Barbara is human. Nana raised her eyebrows. His father? You mean Jimmy's not yours? But he looks just like you. Barbara laughed loudly. Walt blushed. You wouldn't believe how often we hear that. No, I adopted young Atlas when he was 6 months old. But that doesn't matter to me. Jim is my son. Nana turned to Barbara, silently asking about how passionate Walt had suddenly become about the topic. Barbara shrugged. Changelings tend to be extremely paternal, she explained. Well, most of the time. Walt held Barbara close and kissed her temple before turning back to Nana. So, what is Toby's story? Nana chuckled. My husband, Horace, was really an alien named Vex. He went by Horace in an attempt to blend in better. He was called back to his planet just after the wedding and soon after I found out I was pregnant. I was so worried that Ralph would be born looking like his father, but I guess it skipped a generation because only Toby Pie has this ability. Mummy, Jim interrupted, I make this for you. The little boy handed his mother a drawing, as his new friend handed his to Nana. Despite the made-by-a-2-year-old quality, Barbara could tell who everyone was meant to be. It's lovely, kiddo, she praised. You've included Papa Vendel, and is that Uncle O on a computer? Yeah, Jim said, and that's Mommy and Daddy and us when they get back. Toby babbled to his grandmother. That's great, Toby Pie, Nana said, but where's Putt-Putt? Toby looked around. Putt-Putt, Putt-Putt. The old ginger cat poked her head out of a box and meowed. There she is, Toby giggled. Putt-Putt patted over to Jim and purred. Very good, Toby Pie, Nana praised, laughing. But I meant in your picture. Oh, Toby snatched the drawing from Nana and hurried to add Putt-Putt. Walt smiled at Barbara as they watched the two boys. Toby had abandoned his drawing in favor of playing with Jim and Putt-Putt. So, Nana addressed, will you keep my secret if I keep yours? The Stricklers didn't have to think long before agreeing. Sure, they were surprised to discover that aliens exist, but when you live with trolls, you learn to get over it fast. Within a week, Toby and Jim were nearly inseparable, and, as a pair, the toddlers caused a lot of mischief. Some of their trouble was punished, others were photographed, and most of it was both. It took Draal more than a little time to learn how to play gently with the boys. Nana was out shopping when she got the message. She flipped open the phone and grinned at Barbara's text. Walt had Jim on his lap, while Nomura had Toby on hers. All four of them were talking excitedly with Otto, Walt and Nomura's brother from Germany, on a computer screen. Otto is excited to meet Toby, Barbara explained. Jim talks about him all the time. Nana laughed. She was glad the Stricklers and her family were happy with Toby around, but a part of her couldn't help but worry about how the boys would react when Toby had to go back to San Francisco. Another text arrived and pushed the sad thoughts from Nana's mind. Jim and Toby laughed as Otto fought down a strange, hairless green cat. She laughed again. Walt and Barbara were snuggled comfortably in bed when a house phone began to ring. Walt groaned and answered, wondering who in their right mind was calling at 2 a.m. Strickler residence, he mumbled. Walter? Nana's voice shook slightly. I hate to wake you at such an hour, but would you be able to watch Toby Pie for a little bit? Now? Walt asked, slowly waking up. Yes, please. Nana got quiet. There's been an accident. My son and his wife were lost at sea. I need to go to San Francisco. Walt sat up, shifting to his human form. What? I'm on my way over. Barbara moaned and sat up. Walt, what's going on? I'm going to get Toby, Walt told her. His parents... There was an accident. Neither of them survived. Nana has to go to San Francisco. Barbara left out of bed. I'll set up a cot in Jim's room. I want to know everything when you get back, though. In only a few minutes, Walt had walked across the street and returned with the sleeping 2-year-old. Barbara had set up a low cot next to Jim's small bed. After tucking Toby in, the duo went back to their own room. All right, Walt. Barbara sat on the edge of the bed. What happened? Walt sat heavily next to her. A storm sank the cruise ship. There were no survivors. Toby's parents were found among the dead. Nana is going to San Francisco for about a week to take care of the paperwork to get custody of Toby. I denied payment for watching Toby. It just didn't seem right. I agree, Walt, Barbara assured him. But did Nana say what to tell Toby? Only that she would explain to him when she got back. And to call if there were any problems, Walt explained. He's only 2, Barbara. Barbara knew her husband was not one who cried easily, so to see him choking up over the little boy in their son's room, she had a feeling there was a deeper cause. Much to everyone's surprise, Toby showed no surprise at waking up in his best friend's house. Quite the opposite, in fact. The moment Barbara went to wake the boys up, he looked at her, with tears in his eyes. Mommy and Daddy aren't coming back. It wasn't a question. Not knowing what to say, Barbara hugged the toddler as he began to cry and had Walt call Nana. How could he possibly know? The old woman asked. He said he saw them in his dream, Walt explained, that he only sees people in his dreams if they're not coming back. He hasn't said anything since, not even to Jim and Putt-Putt. As the week passed, Toby still refused to talk, even when Nana came home and Jim begged him to. Mommy, Jim cried, why won't Tobes talk to me no more? Does he not like me now? Of course he does, baby, Barbara explained. It's just sometimes when people get really sad, they don't want to talk for a while, sometimes for a really long time. Toby will talk to you again someday, but until then, you're going to have to help him, okay? How? Jim asked, drying his eyes. You see how Toby moves his hands? That's how he talks now. It's called sign language. Walt crouched down next to his wife. That's right, Barbara agreed. But not everyone knows sign language. By learning, not only will you and Toby be able to talk again, but you'll also be able to help other people who can't understand Toby and what he's saying. Okay, Mommy, Daddy, Jim agreed. I'll do it. I'll do anything to help Toby. Barbara hugged her son. That's my brave little knight. Jim returned his mother's hug, squeezing tighter when his father joined them. Walt couldn't help but think of how much Jim was living up to his nickname. Mind your back, young Atlas, he thought. You're too young to carry so much. And that's the end of Chapter 4. Please, if you do enjoy this fic, go leave a comment and a kudos on the original fic. It's linked in the description below. And thank you, and goodbye.